My name is Catherine, and I just turned 34 last month. I drove 600 miles through blinding snow to surprise my family for Christmas after 3 years away. My fingers trembled with excitement as I pressed the doorbell. When Mom opened the door, her smile vanished. "Sorry, wrong house," she said, slamming the door in my face. I stood frozen snowflakes melting on my eyelashes. Later my brother Samuel whispered, "She thinks $68,540 makes her family. If only I knew what would happen after I froze that money." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you loved. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our house was small but always filled with laughter. Dad worked as an accountant at a local firm, while Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school down the street. We weren't rich, but we had enough. My younger brother Samuel and I shared a special bond, despite being 4 years apart. We built snow forts in winter and caught fireflies in summer. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Everything changed when I turned 15. Dad came home one evening, his face ashen. "Your mother and I are getting a divorce," he announced during dinner. Samuel dropped his fork, but I saw it coming. The arguments behind closed doors had grown louder over the past year. Mom claimed Dad lacked ambition. Dad said Mom had changed, always wanting more than we could afford. After the divorce, Dad moved to Seattle for a new job. We saw him twice a year at most. Mom threw herself into dating, determined to upgrade her life, as she put it. Within 8 months, she met Howard Bellingham, a real estate developer, 20 years, her senior, with slicked-back silver hair and a collection of designer watches. He drove a Mercedes and took Mom to restaurants where the menus had no prices. The change in Mom was gradual, but unmistakable. Rebecca Anderson, the woman who once made Halloween costumes from scratch and baked cookies for the whole neighborhood, transformed into Rebecca Bellingham, who discussed country club memberships and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Her Minnesota accent faded, replaced by carefully enunciated syllables that mimicked Howard's East Coast pronunciation. When I graduated high school, Mom and Howard expected me to study business at an Ivy League school. "Howard can pull some strings at Princeton," Mom told me over dinner at their new house. I watched her cut her food into tiny pieces, barely eating. "I want to study art," I replied. The silence that followed was deafening. "Art is a hobby, Catherine, not a career," Mom said finally. "Be practical." But I wasn't practical. I applied to the Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland and received a partial scholarship. When the acceptance letter arrived, I bounced around our house ecstatic. Mom didn't share my enthusiasm. "You're throwing your life away," she said, her voice cold. "Howard offered to pay your full tuition at Princeton." "I never asked for that," I replied. "This is my dream." "Dreams don't pay bills," she countered. I moved to Portland that fall against her wishes. The distance between us grew, measured not just in miles, but in phone calls that became shorter and less frequent. Each conversation felt like navigating a minefield. Mom would casually mention friends' children who were succeeding in medicine, or finance, her disapproval of my choices, evident in every comparison. Samuel remained my lifeline to the family. Even after he moved in with Mom and Howard following high school, he called me regularly. Through him I learned about Mom's social climbing, her desperate attempts to fit into Howard's world. She redecorated their house every year, joined exclusive clubs, and hosted lavish parties for people whose approval she craved. I built a modest life in Portland. After graduation, I found work at a small gallery and created my own art in a tiny studio apartment. Money was tight, but I was following my passion. I dated occasionally, but never found anyone who felt right. My art became my primary relationship, consuming my nights and weekends. 3 years ago, I stopped visiting for Christmas. The previous holiday had been unbearable, with Mom parading me before her new friends, like a disappointment she was graciously tolerating. "Catherine is still pursuing her art," she would say with a tight smile that suggested she expected me to outgrow this phase any minute. Howard would nod sympathetically, as if my career choice was a terminal illness they were bravely enduring. Samuel understood why I stayed away, but this year he insisted. "Mom has been asking about you," he said during our weekly call, in early December. "I think she misses you." "She misses having someone to compare to her friends' successful children," I replied. "People change," Kat Samuel said. "She seems different lately, more reflective. Give her a chance." I wanted to believe him. Maybe 3 years was enough time for wounds to heal. Maybe Mom had realized that her relentless pursuit of status hadn't brought her happiness. I checked my bank account, wincing at the balance. Christmas gifts had already stretched my budget thin, but I could manage gas and a cheap motel if necessary. The drive from Portland to Minneapolis took almost 12 hours in good weather. In December, with snow and ice making the roads treacherous, I allowed 2 days. I packed my trusty Honda Civic with carefully wrapped presents, each selected with thought despite my limited budget. For Samuel, a rare first edition of his favorite childhood book found at a second-hand store. For Howard, handcrafted whiskey stones from a local artisan. And for Mom, a delicate watercolor I had painted of our old family home, the one she had loved before divorce and ambition changed everything. The journey was grueling. I drove through Montana's mountain passes as snow fell in thick curtains. Twice I considered turning back, but Samuel's encouragement kept me going. He sent text updates about preparations for Christmas dinner. The massive tree Howard had installed in their foyer, the expected guests. I imagined reconciliation, a tearful hug from Mom, perhaps an acknowledgement that my path, while different from her expectations, had value. As I crossed into Minnesota, familiar landmarks stirred memories. The exit to the lake where we used to swim in summer. The diner where Dad would take us for pancakes after Sunday church. The shopping mall where Mom and I once spent a whole day, trying on ridiculous hats, laughing until our sides hurt. That was before Howard, before status became her religion. I arrived in Minneapolis on Christmas Eve around 4 in the afternoon. The address Samuel had given me led to an exclusive neighborhood where massive homes sat on sprawling lots. Howard had apparently upgraded from their previous house, which had already seemed extravagant to me. This new place was a stone mansion with pillars flanking the entrance and a circular driveway where luxury cars were parked. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage. Through the massive windows, I could see a Christmas tree that must have been 15 feet tall, dripping with coordinated ornaments. People moved about inside, glasses of champagne in hand. I smoothed my travel-wrinkled clothes, applied fresh lipstick, and grabbed the gift bags. This was it. Time to bridge the 3-year gap and become a family again. I trudged up the shoveled walkway, my boots crunching on the salt spread to prevent ice. The mansion loomed before me, stone facade, glowing amber in the security lights. Garlands of evergreen wrapped the pillars, and an enormous wreath hung on the glossy black door. Through leaded glass windows, I glimpsed people in formal attire, laughing, clinking glasses, enjoying the warmth of family and connection that I had been missing. My heart pounded as I shifted the gift bags to press the doorbell. A melodic chime sounded inside, and I practiced my smile, ready for surprise and hopefully joy. My fingernails dug into my palms as I waited, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The door swung open, releasing a wave of warmth scented with cinnamon and pine. My mother stood framed in the doorway, a vision in a red silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo, diamond earrings catching the light. For one brief moment her face showed nothing but shock. Then her expression changed. Her eyes narrowed, her lips thinned, and something cold and terrible washed over her features. She glanced behind her quickly, then back at me. When she spoke, her voice was devoid of any maternal warmth. "Sorry, wrong house," she said flatly, and before I could respond, she closed the door with a decisive click. I stood there, the gift bag suddenly heavy in my hands, my mouth open, but no sound emerging. Surely this was a mistake, a terrible joke. I raised my hand to knock again but froze when I heard laughter resume inside, as if my appearance had been nothing but a momentary interruption to their festivities. "Mom," I called, my voice embarrassingly small. "Samuel." I knocked, this time the sound pathetically muffled by my glove. No response. The door remained closed, the wreath staring back at me like a holiday eye that refused to acknowledge my existence. I stepped back, nearly slipping on the icy step, and looked up at the windows. Figures moved past, glasses in hand, completely unaware or uncaring that I was outside in the cold. I retreated to my car, fumbling with my phone. Samuel would fix this. There had to be an explanation. I called his number, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted, "I'm outside." Mom shut the door in my face. "What's going on?" Minutes passed. No response. I turned the car on for heat, but remained parked in the street watching the house. Through the windows I could see my mother moving among guests, laughing, the perfect hostess. Howard stood by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a tumbler of amber liquid. And then I spotted Samuel, my ally, my brother, standing in a corner, talking to a young woman I didn't recognize. He checked his phone, frowned slightly, then put it away without responding. Tears blurred my vision as the reality sank in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. My mother had deliberately shut me out. My brother was aware I was outside but chose to continue partying. The family I had driven 600 miles to see had decided I didn't exist. I sat there for almost an hour, calling Samuel repeatedly, watching the celebration I wasn't welcome to join. Finally, with fingers numb from cold, despite the car heater, I drove away. A quick search on my phone led me to the nearest affordable motel, a shabby place with flickering neon and stained carpets. The clerk barely looked up as he processed my credit card, handing me a key to room 119. The room smelled of industrial cleaner, barely masking cigarette smoke. I placed my bags on the faded bedspread and sat beside them, still wearing my coat. The events of the day felt surreal. Had I imagined my mother's rejection? Was there some explanation that would make sense of her cruelty? Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying the moment at the door, searching for clues I might have missed. Had Mom been afraid of someone inside seeing me? Was she protecting some secret? Every scenario I constructed collapsed under the weight of the simple truth my own mother had pretended not to know me. Around dawn, my phone chimed with a text message. "Samuel, finally. Sorry about last night. Can we meet Denny's on Wayzata Boulevard 9 a.m.? No explanation, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a terse invitation that felt more like an obligation than a desire to see me. I considered driving back to Portland immediately, but after 12 hours on the road yesterday, my body rebelled at the thought. Besides, I deserved answers. I showered in the lukewarm water, dressed in my cleanest remaining clothes, and applied makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. The woman in the mirror looked older than 34 lines of hurt etched around her mouth. I hardly recognized myself. The Denny's parking lot was half empty when I arrived. Through the window, I could see Samuel already seated in a booth, fidgeting with a sugar packet. My brother, once my closest confidant, now a stranger, complicit in my humiliation. I took a deep breath and went inside, sliding into the booth across from him. Samuel looked up, guilt written across his features. The boy who had once helped me build snow forts was now a man with our father's jawline and our mother's calculating eyes. In that moment, I wasn't sure which parent he took after more. "You look good, Kat," Samuel said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. He wore an expensive-looking sweater and a watch that probably cost more than my car. The last 3 years had transformed my little brother into someone I barely recognized. "Wish I could say the same for you," I replied, not bothering to hide my anger. "What happened last night, Samuel? Why did Mom pretend not to know me?" A waitress approached with coffee, and Samuel waited until she left before speaking. "It's complicated," he began, twisting his napkin. "Mom has changed since you last visited." "Changed how?" "Into someone who disowns her daughter." Samuel winced. Howard's Aunt Gertrude died last year. She was wealthy, never had kids of her own. She left everything to Howard with instructions to share with his family. I shook my head confused. What does that have to do with Mom slamming the door in my face? The inheritance was specific. Samuel continued, his voice low. $68,540 to each family member. Howard, Mom, me, and technically you. The oddly specific amount struck me as strange, but I focused on the implications. Technically. Samuel's eyes darted around the restaurant before he leaned closer. Mom convinced Howard that you aren't really family anymore. That you abandoned us when you moved to Portland and rejected our values. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. I didn't abandon anyone. I just chose a different path. I know that, Samuel said quickly. But Mom has been cultivating this image of the perfect family. She joined the country club, got involved with charity boards. Howard's friends are all old money, and she desperately wants their approval. Your art career doesn't fit her narrative. So she just writes me out of existence. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Samuel looked miserable. It started small, not mentioning you at parties, removing your photos from the family albums. Then, when the inheritance came, she saw an opportunity. An opportunity to steal my share. The realization was dawning, ugly and undeniable. She told Howard you wouldn't want anything to do with his aunt's money, that you'd made it clear you didn't need family support. Samuel couldn't meet my eyes. I should have said something, but by then it had gone too far. Mom had been telling everyone for years that she only had one child. I remembered the text messages Samuel had sent, encouraging me to visit. Is that why you wanted me to come for Christmas? To tell me about the inheritance? He nodded slowly. And because I miss you. Because what Mom is doing isn't right. She's been lying to everyone, even Howard's relatives. Saying you're mentally unstable, that you cut us off, that you're involved with drugs. Each accusation felt like another door slamming in my face. My own mother had been systematically destroying my reputation among people who had never even met me. There's more, Samuel said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. I've been saving this for you. It's your share. I convinced Howard to give it to me for safekeeping, without telling Mom. I stared at the envelope without touching it. Why would he do that? Howard isn't as bad as you think. He knows something isn't right with Mom's stories, but he avoids conflict. Easier to give me the money than confront her. I opened the envelope and saw a check made out to me for exactly $68,540. My share of the inheritance from a woman I had never met, from a family that pretended I didn't exist. She thinks $68,540 makes her family. Samuel whispered. A strange mixture of disgust and sadness in his voice. As if she can just buy and sell people's existence, based on whether they fit her image. I closed the envelope, my mind racing. This money could change my life. Pay off my student loans. Fund a real studio instead of working from my apartment. But accepting it felt wrong, like agreeing to be bought off. What happens if I take this? I asked. Samuel shrugged. Mom never has to know. You go back to Portland. I keep pretending to believe her lies, life continues. And if I don't want to pretend anymore, if I don't want to be erased. A flash of fear crossed his face. Kat, don't. Mom is obsessed with appearances now. If you confront her, she'll make things worse for both of us. Worse than pretending her daughter doesn't exist. Worse than slamming a door in my face on Christmas Eve. My voice rose, causing nearby diners to glance our way. Samuel reached for my hand, but I pulled back. I'm sorry, he said. I should have warned you, should have stood up to her sooner. I just didn't know how. I studied my brother's face, seeing the boy who had once followed me everywhere mixed with the man who had learned to compromise his integrity. He was as much a victim of our mother's transformation as I was, but he had chosen compliance, while I had chosen distance. What does she want from me? I asked finally. To disappear completely. To pretend I was never born. She wants to control the narrative, Samuel replied. And you're the one variable she can't control. It terrifies her. As I left the diner, the envelope heavy in my pocket, I realized Samuel had given me more than money. He had given me knowledge, and knowledge was power. My mother thought she could erase me with a slammed door and some well-placed lies. She was about to learn otherwise. Back in my motel room, I spread everything out on the bed. The check for $68,540. My driver's license proving I was indeed Catherine Anderson, daughter of Rebecca. Old family photos I kept in my wallet, showing a smiling mother with her arm around my shoulders at high school graduation, evidence of a connection she now denied. I remembered moments from childhood when Mom had been my biggest supporter. She attended every school art show, proudly pointing out my work to other parents. "My Catherine has a gift," she would say, her voice warm with pride. What had happened to that woman? Had she always harbored this capacity for cruelty? Or had money and status truly transformed her? The check seemed to mock me from the bedspread. More money than I had ever had at once, yet it represented everything wrong with my family now. Taking it and disappearing would be easiest. I could pay off debts, advance my career, never look back. But something in me rebelled at the simplicity of that solution. It felt like accepting erasure, confirming my mother's revision of our family history. I opened my laptop and researched banking options. There were ways to deposit a check but temporarily freeze access to the funds. A financial hold that would prevent the money from being used while still establishing my claim to it. I could make a statement without rejecting what was rightfully mine. The First National Bank had a branch open despite it being Christmas Eve morning. I dressed carefully, wanting to appear professional and trustworthy. The bank manager, Janet, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a holiday brooch pinned to her blazer. "This is an unusual request," she said after I explained what I wanted to do. "You want to deposit this check, but place a temporary freeze on the account." "Yes," I confirmed. "It's a family matter. I need to establish my claim to these funds while some issues are resolved." Janet studied me over her reading glasses. Normally I'd say this sounds suspicious, but something tells me there's more to this story. "My mother is trying to deny my existence to keep this inheritance for herself," I said simply. "I need to prove I'm real, and that this money is legally mine, but I don't want to spend it until certain acknowledgments are made." Janet nodded slowly. "Family and money. Always complicated. I can set this up for you, but there are some legal forms you'll need to sign." An hour later, I left the bank with documentation of my deposit and the account freeze. The money was mine but untouchable for now, a perfect metaphor for my relationship with my mother. She could deny me emotionally, but she couldn't deny my legal existence or my rights. I drove past my mother's house again, parking across the street with a clear view of the festivities continuing inside. Christmas Eve preparations were in full swing. Caterers arrived with trays of food. Guests began to appear in evening wear. Through the windows, I could see my mother directing staff, touching her hair frequently, the perfect hostess. I texted Samuel, "Check, deposited, but frozen. Won't use the money until Mom acknowledges what she's done." His response came quickly. "Are you crazy? She'll lose her mind when she finds out." "Maybe it's time someone stood up to her," I replied. "She'll blame me for giving you the check." "Tell her the truth. I found out about the inheritance and demanded what was mine." Samuel didn't respond for several minutes. Finally, "Be careful. You don't know what she's like now." But I did know. I had seen the cold dismissal in her eyes. The woman who had taught me to stand up for myself was about to learn I had been paying attention. I returned to the motel, ordering a sad Christmas Eve dinner from the only delivery place still open. As I ate lukewarm Chinese food, I thought about previous holidays. The Christmas, when Samuel and I had snuck downstairs at midnight to peek at presents. The year Mom had organized a neighborhood caroling group. The traditions that had once defined our family, now replaced by cocktail parties and social climbing. My phone rang at exactly midnight. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "How dare you?" she hissed without preamble. "How dare you manipulate your brother and steal what isn't yours?" "Hello to you too, Mom," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Merry Christmas." "Don't play games with me. I know Samuel gave you Gertrude's money. I want it back immediately. It's my inheritance. From family. Aren't I family, Mom?" She made a sound between a laugh and a snort. Family supports each other. Family shows up. Family fits in. You chose to walk away when you rejected the opportunities Howard and I offered. I chose a different path, not a different family. You're the one who slammed the door in my face last night. You showed up unannounced during an important party. What was I supposed to do? The casual cruelty of her response stunned me. Introduce your daughter to your friends. Hug her, act like a mother. Return the money, Catherine. Now, or you'll regret it. I've already deposited it, I said calmly. But don't worry, I've frozen the account. I won't spend a penny until you publicly acknowledge me as your daughter and correct all the lies you've been telling. The silence that followed was so complete, I thought she might have hung up. Then she spoke, her voice terrifyingly quiet. You have no idea what you've done. The call ended. I sat in the darkened motel room, shaking slightly but also feeling strangely empowered. For years I had avoided conflict with my mother, retreating rather than engaging. Now I had finally stood my ground. My phone began to light up with messages. First from Samuel, Mom is on the warpath. What did you say to her? Then from unknown numbers, relatives and friends of my mother's. I had never met, each message more accusatory than the last. I had ruined Christmas. I was selfish. I was mentally unstable. I was a drug addict. My mother's lies spreading like wildfire through her social circle. By 2 a.m, the calls began again. Mom using Howard's phone this time. This isn't a game, Howard said, his voice strained. Your mother is extremely upset. I'm sorry you've been caught in the middle, I replied sincerely. But she's been lying about me for years, denying my existence. I'm not backing down. More calls followed. Mom again. Samuel pleading for peace. Mom using the landline. With each call her threats escalated. She would sue me. She would have me arrested for fraud. She would tell everyone I was dangerous and delusional. By dawn my phone log showed 51 calls and 11 explicit threats documented in texts and voicemails. Christmas morning broke clear and cold sunlight reflecting off snow with blinding brightness. I felt exhausted, but resolute. The holiday I had driven 600 miles to celebrate would be unlike any Christmas before, but perhaps it would finally bring the gift of truth. I spent Christmas morning alone in my motel room watching holiday movies on the grainy television while my phone continued to light up with calls and messages. By noon, the count had reached 25. I silenced notifications, but kept the phone nearby, evidence accumulating with each missed call. A knock at my door startled me around 1 o'clock. I approached cautiously, half expecting to find my mother on the other side ready to continue her tirade in person. Instead, Howard stood there, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes that still probably cost more than my monthly rent. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated before stepping aside. This was the man who had changed our family dynamics forever. Yet he looked strangely vulnerable, standing in my shabby motel room. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he said, declining my offer to sit on the room's only chair. "She's hosting Christmas lunch for 30 people and thinks I'm picking up more ice." "Why are you here, Howard?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his silver hair. "This situation has gotten out of control. Rebecca is not handling things well." "She's the one who created this situation," I pointed out. "All I did was deposit what was legally given to me." "And freeze the account," he added. "That's the part that's causing problems." "Why? If it's just about principle, about acknowledging me as family, why does it matter if the money is temporarily inaccessible?" Howard looked uncomfortable. "It's complicated." Try me. He paced the small room before speaking. Your mother has made some financial decisions lately without consulting me. Investments that haven't panned out. She was counting on Gertrude's money to cover certain obligations that are coming due. The truth dawned slowly. She's in financial trouble. We're not destitute, Howard said quickly. But cash flow is temporarily tight, and your portion of the inheritance was earmarked for some pressing bills. I laughed without humor. So all this is actually about money. Not principle, not family image. She needs my inheritance to cover her debts. Rebecca has grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, Howard said diplomatically. Sometimes her spending exceeds our income. And the mansion. The parties, the designer clothes. Howard looked away. Appearances matter in our circle. More than family. More than basic decency. He had no answer for that. After an awkward silence, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card. This is my private cell number. If you're willing to discuss releasing the funds, call me directly. Perhaps we can reach a compromise that acknowledges your position while helping your mother save face. I took the card without commitment. She'd have to publicly acknowledge me as her daughter, correct all the lies she's told about me being unstable or on drugs, apologize for last night. Howard nodded slowly. I'll talk to her. But Catherine, you should know your mother rarely backs down. Her pride won't allow it. After he left, I sat on the bed, contemplating this new information. The perfect life my mother had constructed was a facade, a house of cards, built on debt and deception. Somehow, that made her rejection even more painful. She hadn't just chosen status over me. She had chosen the appearance of status, an illusion she was desperate to maintain. Samuel texted around 3. Can I stop by? Brought Christmas dinner? Mom thinks I'm meeting friends. When he arrived 30 minutes later, he carried plastic containers of turkey stuffing, mashed potatoes, and pie, smuggled from our mother's lavish meal. We sat across from each other on the motel beds, eating from takeout containers with plastic utensils, a sad parody of family dinner. Howard came by earlier, I said between bites. Told me Mom's in financial trouble. Samuel nodded. It's been building for a while. Designer clothes, spa treatments, donations, to get on the right charity boards. She spends like the money will never run out, but Howard's business has had setbacks this year. Why didn't you tell me this morning? Would it have changed anything? He asked. Besides, I only know because I overheard them arguing last month. They don't include me in financial discussions. I studied my brother, seeing both the complicit adult and the trapped child. What happened to us, Samuel? How did we become this broken? His eyes welled with unexpected tears. I don't know. Sometimes I look at Mom and don't recognize her at all. The things she says about you when you're not around. He shook his head. I should have defended you more. Should have called her out on the lies. Why didn't you? Because I live in her house. Because she controls everything. Because standing up to her means becoming the next target. He looked ashamed. Not everyone is as brave as you, Kat. His admission touched me. I'm not brave, just stubborn. Same thing sometimes. He managed a small smile. What are you going to do now? I considered the question. I think it's time to stop hiding. Time to confront Mom directly with witnesses present. You want to go to the house. Now. During her Christmas dinner party. Why not? She can either acknowledge me as her daughter, or explain to all her important guests why she's throwing me out. Samuel looked terrified but also strangely relieved. She'll never forgive either of us. Maybe forgiveness isn't what we need from her anymore. We drove to the mansion in separate cars, Samuel leading the way. The driveway was filled with luxury vehicles. Music and laughter spilled from open windows, despite the cold. I straightened my shoulders and approached the front door, the same door that had been slammed in my face just yesterday. This time I didn't hesitate. I rang the bell decisively, standing directly in view of the peephole. Samuel hung back, his face pale but determined. When the door opened, A server in a black uniform looked at me questioningly. "I'm Catherine Anderson," I said clearly. "Rebecca's daughter. I'm here to see my mother." Before the server could respond, my mother appeared behind him, her face freezing when she saw me. She was impeccably dressed in a green silk outfit, diamonds at her throat and ears. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, trying to block my view of the party inside. "Leave immediately, or I'll call the police." "Go ahead," I replied calmly. "I'm sure your guests would be fascinated to hear why you're having your own daughter arrested on Christmas Day." Her eyes darted around, noticing Samuel behind me. "You too, after everything we've done for you." Guests were beginning to notice the confrontation at the door. I saw Howard approaching, his expression concerned. A few curious faces appeared behind him. "Is everything all right?" Rebecca asked an older woman in a red dress. My mother's smile appeared instantly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Just a minor issue with an uninvited guest. Nothing to worry about." "Not even when the uninvited guest is your daughter?" I asked loudly enough for others to hear. "The daughter you told everyone doesn't exist or is mentally unstable." Murmurs spread through the nearby guests. My mother's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly, panic flashing in her eyes. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Howard suggested, trying to defuse the situation. "I think we're beyond private discussions," I replied. "Not after 51 phone calls and 11 threats through the night. Not after years of lies." More guests were gathering now, the drama at the door more interesting than whatever had been happening inside. My mother's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she realized her carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. "This person is disturbed," she announced to the crowd. "She's making absurd claims for financial gain." "I have evidence," I countered, pulling out my phone. Voicemails, texts, birth certificate, family photos. Everything needed to prove exactly who I am and what's been happening. Howard placed a hand on my mother's arm. "Rebecca, perhaps we should." She shook him off violently. "Don't touch me. This is your fault for giving Samuel that money. You knew what would happen." The raw emotion in her voice silenced the onlookers. This was no longer entertainment. It was a family imploding in real time. "I'll call my lawyer," my mother threatened, her voice shaking. "I'll have the bank freeze that account permanently. You'll never see a penny." "It's already frozen," I reminded her. "By me. And it stays that way until you tell the truth." An older gentleman stepped forward from the crowd. "Rebecca, what exactly is going on here? Is this truly your daughter?" My mother looked trapped, her eyes darting between her guests, Howard, Samuel, and me. The perfect image she had cultivated for years was shattering before her eyes, and she had no script for this scenario. "Call whoever you want," I said quietly. "Your lawyer, the bank, the police. But the truth isn't going away, and neither am I." She turned and pushed through the crowd, disappearing into the house. Howard gave me an unreadable look before following her. The guests stood awkwardly, unsure whether to return to their celebrations or continue watching the drama unfold. Samuel moved to my side, taking my hand. "That was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever seen." "Probably both," I admitted, suddenly exhausted. "Let's go." As we left, I could hear conversations resuming behind us, undoubtedly dissecting what they had witnessed. My mother's perfect Christmas party had become the scene of her social unraveling, and no amount of champagne could wash away what had been revealed. Throughout the evening and into the night, my phone continued to ring, Mom using different numbers to bypass my blocks, calls from lawyers speaking in threatening tones, messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years, some supportive, others condemning. By dawn on December 26th, my phone log showed 51 calls and 11 explicit threats, just as I had told the party guests. The truth laid bare in digital records. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of legal consultations and emotional processing. I extended my stay at the motel, unwilling to drive back to Portland until I had some resolution. Samuel visited daily, bringing updates from the household that was now in complete disarray. Mom hasn't left her bedroom in 2 days, he reported on December 28th. Howard is sleeping in the guest room. 3 people canceled their New Year's Eve RSVPs, citing family obligations, which everyone knows is code for not wanting to be associated with the drama. I consulted with a lawyer named Michael Brennan, who specialized in inheritance disputes. In his downtown office with views of the Minneapolis skyline, he reviewed the documentation I had gathered. "The money is legally yours," he confirmed. "Your mother has no grounds to challenge your receipt of the inheritance. As for the freeze you placed on the account, that's your prerogative as the account holder." "And the threats she's made?" I asked. "Concerning but ultimately toothless. She can't have you arrested for accepting an inheritance that was rightfully yours. The recorded threats could actually work against her if this escalated to court, which I don't recommend for either party." I left his office with confirmation of what I already suspected. This wasn't about legal rights but emotional ones. The money was merely a symbol of the recognition I sought from a mother who had tried to erase me. Samuel reported that distant relatives had been calling curious about the daughter they had been told was troubled or non-existent. The story had spread through my mother's social circle like wildfire, each retelling more dramatic than the last. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling, and her response was to retreat rather than repair. On New Year's Eve, I received an unexpected call from Aunt Judith, my mother's sister, who lived in Florida. We hadn't spoken in at least 5 years. "I always wondered why Rebecca stopped mentioning you," she said after awkward greetings. "She told everyone you had severed contact, that you wanted nothing to do with the family." "That was never true," I replied. "I just chose a different path than she wanted for me." "Your mother always cared too much about appearances," Aunt Judith said with a sigh. "Even as a girl she was obsessed with what others thought. But I never imagined she'd go this far." The conversation was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Aunt Judith invited me to visit her in Tampa, an olive branch from a part of the family I thought I had lost. On January 2nd, Howard called from his private number. "Rebecca is in the hospital," he said, without preamble. "Exhaustion and anxiety. The doctor gave her something to help her rest." My first instinct was concern, followed quickly by suspicion. Is this real or another manipulation? Howard sounded tired. "It's real. She collapsed this morning after another night without sleep. Samuel thought you should know." I agreed to visit the hospital that afternoon. The facility was private and luxurious, more like a hotel than a medical center. I found my mother in a private room, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Without her perfect makeup and styled hair, the vulnerability of her true age showed through. She watched me enter with wary eyes but didn't immediately order me out, which I took as progress. "The doctor says it's anxiety," she said, after an uncomfortable silence. "Says, I need to reduce stress." "I'm sorry you're unwell," I replied sincerely. She fiddled with her hospital bracelet. "Howard says you've frozen the money because you want me to acknowledge you publicly, to admit I lied." "Yes." "Do you have any idea how humiliating that would be?" The questions I'd have to answer. The gossip. I sat in the visitor's chair beside her bed. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have my own mother slam a door in my face? To hear from my brother that you've been telling people I'm mentally unstable or on drugs? To drive 600 miles for Christmas, only to be treated like a stranger?" For the first time I saw a flicker of something like shame cross her face. "I never meant for it to go this far. It started with small omissions, then grew. The more time passed, the harder it became to explain your absence." "So, you created a fictional, troubled daughter, rather than admit the truth that I simply chose a different life than you wanted for me." She looked away. "You have no idea what it's like in my world. The constant judgment, the expectations, everyone watching for any sign of imperfection. That's the world you chose, Mom. You weren't born into it. You pursued it deliberately, discarding anything and anyone who didn't fit your new image. Including you," she whispered so softly. I almost missed it. Including me, I confirmed. We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the beeping of a monitor and distant hospital announcements. Finally, she spoke again. What exactly do you want from me? The truth. Tell Howard's family, your friends, everyone who's heard lies about me over the years. Admit that I'm your daughter, that I'm not troubled or dangerous, that the only thing I did wrong was choose art over business. She closed her eyes briefly. And if I do this, the money would be unfrozen. Yes. And you'd go back to Portland. Back to your life there. I studied her face, searching for the mother I had once known. I would go back to my life, but I don't want to go back to being erased. I want normal communication, holiday calls, acknowledgement of my birthday, basic respect. She didn't agree immediately, but she didn't refuse either. It was the first conversation we'd had in years that didn't end in recrimination or rejection. A small step, but a step nonetheless. As I left the hospital, Samuel was arriving. We spoke briefly in the hallway, his expression hopeful for the first time since Christmas. She asked me about your art yesterday, he said. Actually seemed interested. First time that's happened in forever. Don't get too excited, I cautioned. People don't change overnight. No, but sometimes a shock makes them reevaluate. He squeezed my arm. I'm looking at apartments, by the way. Time to move out of the mansion. Maybe find a place closer to downtown. Big step. Overdue, he corrected. And I've been thinking about visiting Portland. If that's okay with you. I hugged him tightly. More than okay. Over the next few days, small shifts occurred. My mother's social media accounts, previously scrubbed of any reference to me, suddenly featured a Throwback Thursday post, a family photo from years ago with me clearly present. Howard called to say she was drafting an email to close friends and family clarifying misunderstandings about her daughter. When I checked my bank account, I discovered she had withdrawn exactly half the inheritance amount, leaving the rest untouched. An attached note read simply, "For art supplies. Make something beautiful." It wasn't a full resolution or a fairy tale reconciliation. My mother was still controlled by appearances, still capable of cruelty. But the absolute denial had cracked, allowing small truths to emerge. It was enough for me to unfreeze the remaining funds, a gesture of cautious faith in possibilities. Samuel helped me pack my car for the return journey to Portland. Next Christmas will be different, he promised. Maybe we can start our own traditions, just the two of us. I'd like that, I replied, hugging him goodbye. As I drove away from Minneapolis, retracing the 600 miles that had brought me to this painful but necessary confrontation, I felt lighter. The inheritance money would help my art career, but the real gift had been the reclamation of my identity, the refusal to be erased for someone else's convenience. The road ahead stretched long and snow-covered, but for the first time in years it felt like I was driving toward something rather than away. 6 months after the Christmas confrontation, my life in Portland had transformed in subtle but significant ways. The inheritance money, minus what my mother had taken, allowed me to rent a proper art studio in a converted warehouse downtown. No more painting at my kitchen table or storing canvases under my bed. I bought professional-grade supplies, invested in proper lighting, even hired a part-time assistant to help with administrative tasks. My work evolved to exploring themes of identity, erasure, and reclamation. A series of portraits featuring partially obscured faces caught the attention of a respected gallery owner, resulting in my first solo show scheduled for fall. The validation felt especially sweet, given my mother's long dismissal of my artistic path. Samuel and I spoke weekly via video calls, our relationship stronger than it had been since childhood. He had followed through on his plan to move out of our mother's house, finding an apartment in downtown Minneapolis and a job at a tech startup unconnected to Howard's business interests. The physical distance from our mother seemed to strengthen his spine. He spoke more confidently, laughed more freely. "I'm thinking about visiting in August," he told me during our most recent call. "Maybe staying for a couple of weeks if that's not too long." "Stay as long as you want," I replied sincerely. "I have a pull-out couch with your name on it." The educational trust I had established with part of the inheritance was already benefiting our cousin Lily's daughter, who had started college with financial support that Lily, a single mother, couldn't have provided alone. The thank you card they sent, filled with genuine gratitude, meant more than any society acknowledgement my mother had ever chased. Communication with my mother remained complicated. She had followed through on her promise to clarify misunderstandings about me to her social circle, though the explanation painted her in the most favorable light possible. According to several relatives who contacted me afterward, she claimed we had experienced a mutual misunderstanding that led to an unfortunate estrangement, carefully avoiding any admission of deliberately erasing me from family history. Howard called occasionally with updates, always polite but slightly awkward. "Your mother received an invitation to a gallery opening in Portland next month," he mentioned during one conversation. "Someone who knows your work apparently. She hasn't decided whether to attend." I appreciated his effort at bridge building, but harbored no illusions about rapid reconciliation. Some relationships couldn't be fully repaired, only renegotiated into something less harmful. In May, I received an unexpected invitation to my cousin Robert's wedding in Seattle. The invitation explicitly included my name, a small victory in being recognized as part of the extended family again. The handwritten note mentioned that my mother would be attending but assured me seating would be arranged thoughtfully. The acknowledgement of potential tension was itself a form of recognition I wouldn't have received a year ago. As spring warmed into summer, I found myself reflecting on the journey since last Christmas. The pain of rejection had gradually transformed into something more complex, a mixture of acceptance and resilience. I no longer craved my mother's approval with the desperation of before. The need to be validated by someone incapable of giving it had diminished, replaced by confidence in my own choices. My apartment slowly filled with new friends, fellow artists, and local creative people who appreciated me for exactly who I was. We held informal critique sessions on Sunday afternoons, sharing wine and honest feedback on works in progress. These people had no preconceived notions about who I should be, no family history clouding their judgment. With them, I could simply exist as Catherine the artist, neither more nor less than my authentic self. Samuel visited for a weekend in June, his first trip to Portland since I had moved there. We explored the city together, hiking in Forest Park, browsing Powell's books, sampling local breweries. Away from our mother's influence, he revealed a wry sense of humor I had forgotten he possessed. On his last evening over dinner at my favorite neighborhood restaurant, he made an observation that stuck with me. "You know what I realized this weekend?" he said, twirling pasta on his fork. "Money doesn't change people. It just reveals who they always were." "What do you mean?" "Mom didn't suddenly become status-obsessed when she married Howard. Those tendencies were always there, just constrained by circumstances. The money and position just gave her permission to fully become that person." "And what did money reveal about you?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "That I value independence more than luxury. That I'd rather live simply on my own terms than lavishly on someone else's." I thought about what the inheritance had revealed about me. Not the desire for wealth itself, but the refusal to be bought off, to have my existence negotiated away for convenience. The money had offered freedom, but the true liberation had come from standing my ground. In July, I received a brief email from my mother, the first direct communication since the hospital. "Howard showed me the announcement for your gallery show. Congratulations." No warm wishes, no indication she would attend, but also no criticism or dismissal. A neutral acknowledgement of my professional achievement, which from her represented significant progress. Howard called the following week with news that surprised me. "Your mother has started therapy," he said. "Weekly sessions. Her doctor recommended it after the anxiety diagnosis, but I never thought she'd agree." "Is it helping?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Hard to tell. She doesn't discuss the sessions, but she's less volatile, more reflective." He paused. "She asked to see photos of your new studio. I thought you should know. Small steps. Microscopic, compared to the magnitude of hurt but movement nonetheless. As August approached, bringing Samuel's planned visit and preparations for my exhibition, I found myself experiencing a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The anger that had driven me to confront my mother at Christmas had transformed into something quieter but stronger, a certainty about my own worth that no longer required external validation. My mother might never fully acknowledge the damage she had caused or offer the apology I deserved. She might never value my artistic path or understand my choices. But I had stopped waiting for those things, stopped measuring my success by her standards. The freedom in that realization was worth more than any inheritance. On a warm Sunday evening, I hosted a small gathering in my studio to celebrate its 6-month anniversary. Friends brought food and wine, admired works in progress, offered feedback and encouragement. As conversations flowed around me, I stepped outside briefly for fresh air, looking up at the Portland sky transitioning from sunset to twilight. My phone buzzed with a text message from Howard. Your mother mentioned possibly visiting Portland in October. Would that timing work with your schedule? I smiled slightly at the carefully diplomatic phrasing. Not a commitment, just a possibility. Not enthusiasm, just availability. But also not rejection or erasure. I replied simply, October works. Let me know if she decides to come. The inheritance money had changed my circumstances, but the confrontation had changed something deeper. I had refused to be defined by someone else's narrative, refused to be erased for someone else's convenience. That stand had cost me temporarily, but freed me permanently from the prison of seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it. True family, I had learned, couldn't be measured in dollars. It was built on mutual respect, on acceptance of differences, on the freedom to be authentically yourself. Some family we're born into, some we find along the way, and some we create through our own choices. The most valuable inheritance wasn't the money, but this understanding that home isn't necessarily where you began, but where you can fully exist as yourself. As I rejoined my friends inside, their laughter and conversation wrapping around me like a blanket, I felt gratitude for this hard-won wisdom. The journey from that snowy doorstep rejection to this warm circle of acceptance had been painful but necessary. I had driven 600 miles seeking family, and found instead the strength to create my own definition of belonging. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations to be true to yourself? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of finding strength through difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the family we choose matters more than the family we're born into.